Audio Journal Entry, January 3rd, 2030. Recorded by Dr. Adrian Voss, Senior Orbital Climate Analyst, ESA CERN Joint Atmospheric Observatory. Personal record for continuity and archival. This entry marks the first official audio log of the orbital shift anomaly we've been tracking for 6 months. Time is 03:14 UTC. The sky outside is clear. The numbers are not. I used to think of the Earth's orbit as dependable, predictable, the one constant we could build everything around, our agriculture, our calendars, even our myths. It was our cosmic metronome, set by gravity's hand, pulsing in a quiet rhythm around the sun for billions of years. Now I'm watching that rhythm bend. It started, as most disasters do, quietly. 6 months ago, we noticed a discrepancy in readings from the Solar Drift Array, a ring of solar observation satellites strung across Lagrange points 1 and 2. The telemetry team flagged it as a rounding error, a few microseconds of drift, but then it kept repeating, exactly. That's the thing about nature. It doesn't do exact repetition unless something is pushing it. So we dug deeper, and what we found still doesn't sit right in my chest. Earth's orbit was elongating, imperceptibly at first, just a few microns in trajectory displacement per week. But once we calculated orbital projections forward into the next few years, the implications became stark. Instead of a nearly circular ellipse, Earth's path was being subtly pulled into a longer oval. The difference was just under 5,000 kilometers of total variation in our distance from the Sun, barely a rounding error on paper. But when you scale that across the sensitive balance of solar irradiance, oceanic inertia, and polar jet stream dynamics, it's like placing a feather on a knife's edge. The blade tilts, and it already has. December 2029 was the warmest in recorded equatorial history, by a full 2.1 degrees C above the previous record. Eastern Africa lost 80% of its maize yield. Bangladesh faced 6 days straight of inland saltwater flooding from late cyclones that shouldn't have formed that time of year. Meanwhile, in the southern Andes, the opposite. Their spring became a winter relapse. We saw entire mountain villages in Argentina cut off by late snowpack avalanches. No one wanted to say the word, not in official memos, not even in hushed after-hours chatter. Orbital instability. That's not climate change. That's something else. We started checking everything. Mars's orbit, Venus, even Jupiter's gravitational harmonics. It turns out, Jupiter had a slight precessional hiccup, a minor shift in its axial tilt due to an intense magnetic flux event 3 years ago. Some suspect it was triggered by a localized density wave moving through the heliopause, perhaps an echo of a micronova from beyond the Oort cloud. But the data's messy. Whatever it was, the domino fell, and Earth, smallest among giants, is downstream. Our orbit changed because something nudged the system. A chain reaction of gentle, cumulative gravity, the kind of long-arc physics that isn't dramatic enough to be seen in a single year, but catastrophic over 10. The public doesn't know yet, or rather, they sense something's wrong, but they're still calling it weird weather. And they're not wrong. It's not global warming. It's not global cooling. It's global tilting. And we haven't even reached perihelion yet. That's in 2 weeks. God help us. End of recording. Back up to encrypted disk. Tag, OSA, entry 001. Audio Journal Entry. August 6th, 2030. Recorded by Dr. Adrian Voss, Senior Orbital Climate Analyst, ESA CERN, Joint Atmospheric Observatory. Journal Entry 2. Dr. Adrian Voss recording. 6 months since the elliptical deviation confirmed. 42 days since the solstice. We are, by all available data, now fully within the grip of Earth's first elongated orbit-induced thermal wave. The northern hemisphere is breaking. Repeating, breaking. This is not a heat wave. It is a planetary condition. I've started keeping my office underground, not because the observatory's power can't handle the load, yet, but because the windows distort in the midday heat. The laminated polymer in the glass was rated to 60 degrees. We've now crossed 66 in direct solar exposure on 2 consecutive days. The air around the upper floors ripples, like looking through water. That's not a metaphor. The curvature of light is visible with the naked eye. I never thought I'd watch Zurich evacuate. But here we are. Entire city centers across the Alps have issued heat retreat orders. No one wants to use the word collapse, but we've crossed into a new era of urban survivability thresholds. Skyscrapers are expanding out of tolerance. Glass panels crack under solar expansion stress. Blacktops are liquefying. Steel train rails are warping in slow waves. I watched a tram in Milan buckle right off the track, like it had slipped on a ribbon of oil. The worst-hit regions aren't who we expected. The Middle East, parts of India, Sub-Saharan Africa, they've long adapted to high heat logistics. Evaporative infrastructure, underground cooling shafts, radiant shielding. But Oslo, Vancouver, Berlin, they're unraveling. Electric grids are in a tug-of-war between AC demand and rolling brownouts. Most of the northern power stations weren't designed to run sustained outputs at this scale. Transformers in Sweden are literally exploding from load stress. The Baltic corridor has already lost over 3,000 kilometers of cabling to ground fires, sparked by desiccated soil and pine forests drying to tinder. And here's the twisted part. The sun hasn't changed. Solar output remains within normal bounds. Sunspot activity is actually below average. That's what makes this worse. It's not a solar flare event. It's not a burst of UVC. This is simply orbital repositioning. We're closer to the sun during northern summer than we've been in over 9,000 years. Earth swings deeper into perihelion. The angle of solar incidence is more direct, more intense, and it lingers. Our models show that peak solar dwell time, the duration of high zenith exposure per latitude, has increased by 3.6% near the Tropic of Cancer. That sounds small. But 3.6% is 6 additional minutes per day, compounding over weeks. 6 minutes of unfiltered, high-angle sunlight per day turns a farm into a kiln, and the crops are dying. Corn wilted in the U.S. Midwest by mid-July. Wheat in Eastern Europe shriveled before the heads could develop. Even rice paddies in Hokkaido boiled out, heat-stressed before they flowered. This isn't drought. This isn't famine in the old sense. This is light death. Sunlight so hot and persistent it cooks photosynthesis itself. Adaptation? It's chaos. Rooftop reflectors are melting. Shade tent fabrics ignite. People are sealing apartments with foil-lined panels and hiding in bathtubs. France opened the catacombs as emergency housing. In Chicago, municipal buses now act as rotating cooling arcs, ferrying people block to block with onboard mist sprayers. They call it the long summer now. It's not just a heat wave. There is no respite. The planet's seasons have uncoiled into claws, months-long crescendos of intensity that don't return to baseline. We are beginning to suspect that the shift is self-perpetuating. The more extreme our orbital positions become, the more thermal inertia the oceans trap. The more feedback loops in the atmosphere trigger. Jet streams are weakening. Trade winds are stalling. There's talk of static climate zones forming, areas where weather will cease to move at all, where the sun will hang in the same spot for weeks, maybe longer. A permanent zenith. I remember laughing once at the concept of a sun death belt. I'm not laughing now. End of recording. Back up to redundant vault. Tag. OSA entry 002. This summer is not going to end. Audio journal entry. September 29th, 2030. Recorded by Dr. Adrian Voss, Senior Orbital Climate Analyst, ESA CERN, Joint Atmospheric Observatory. Adrian Voss. Audio journal entry 3. The date is September 29th, 2030. Location: Underground Tier 3 Operations Core, Planetary. The grid has begun to fail. No more rolling blackouts. No more emergency bypasses. What we are witnessing is the fracture of continuity itself. I never realized how much we trusted the hum, that gentle, omnipresent murmur of modern life, the lights, the servers, the silent drift of refrigeration coils. But now, silence is becoming louder. In the absence of current, society is unthreading by the hour. The first fractures weren't spectacular. A few localized outages, transformer failures in the hotter zones. But when India's national grid failed on August 23rd, plunging over 600 million into blackout for 13 hours, the real magnitude set in. The orbital shift has brought more than just extreme temperature. It's destabilized the rhythm by which our civilization breathes. Electricity, everywhere, is desynchronized. Here's why. The seasonal elongation of our orbit isn't just raising global heat. It's introducing irregularities in thermal lag. Regional temperature gradients are no longer aligned with grid behavior. Northern regions now require sustained cooling at levels historically reserved for the tropics. Conversely, temperate zones are swinging between polar chill and desert bake in weeks. These transitions wreak havoc on systems built for average demand. But the grid was never designed for extremes. It was built for predictability. And now, everything is failing. The symptoms: inverter failure in solar installations due to midday surge exposure, battery overheating in home units across the U.S. Southwest, fires have destroyed 3 Arizona suburbs, wind turbine stallouts from inconsistent upper atmosphere thermals. The jet stream is off pattern, so even wind is undependable. Hydro plants in Scandinavia are draining reservoirs to zero trying to meet surging demand. Nuclear plants are stable, but surrounded by populations that can no longer support them logistically. Cooling towers require active water loops, and the rivers are evaporating. In response, the ESA CERN initiative has officially launched GridVar, a multi-continent emergency program to dismantle traditional long-distance grids and replace them with micro-reactive energy nodes, or MRENs. These MRENs are designed to be small-scale, block or neighborhood level, AI-regulated for temperature feedback load balancing, powered by hybridized sources, piezoelectric roadways, thermovoltaics, and even kinetic mass storage cylinders spun underground. It's mad science, but we're out of time. The Global Energy Summit last week, held virtually over a low-orbit satellite link, broke down mid-transmission. Connectivity couldn't hold stable long enough for unified resolutions. It ended with 5 nations quietly announcing withdrawal from international energy treaties. Each is hoarding energy domestically now. I watched as our own grid management board overrode civilian access for the first time in Swiss history. Every household above 2,000 meters elevation now has their smart meter remotely capped. A hard maximum, 4.7 kilowatt-hours per day. That's enough for lights, a fridge, and 1 fan. No heat, no AC, not both. We are rationing electricity like water during siege. Meanwhile, I received a report today from West Africa. In Dakar, engineers are repurposing discarded e-bike motors and solar shingles into miniature generation rigs. They're calling them solsticelings. Street kids are running them by day, cooling village shelters. It's beautiful, and desperate and brilliant. But none of it scales fast enough. The fracture isn't just technological, it's philosophical. For 150 years we centralized power, both political and electric. Now, we're trying to disassemble it in real time, like a plane being re-engineered mid-flight. And all the while, the sun grows closer, the orbit stretches longer, and the hum we built our world upon begins to flicker like a dying signal. End of entry. Back up to Deep Vault. Tag OSA entry 003. Estimated safe uptime remaining: 6 hours. Recorded by Dr. Adrian Voss, Senior Orbital Climate Analyst, ESA CERN Joint Atmospheric Observatory. Adrian Voss, Journal Entry. 4 November 5th, 2030. The autumnal equinox passed 44 days ago. Or rather, it didn't. The celestial moment occurred, yes, but nothing about the Earth's climate responded in kind. It was a ghost equinox. The seasonal balance has broken. The word equinox means equal night. In every textbook I've ever taught from, it's a sacred geometry. 2 days each year where light and darkness share the sky equally. A symmetrical breath in the planetary lungs, the fulcrum of the seasons. This year, there was no breath, just exhale, endless heat. We passed the September 22nd equinox with no indication of change in the northern hemisphere. The temperatures did not cool. The jet streams did not shift. The days remained long and punishing, with some cities still reporting 14 hours of daylight into October. Climate systems that once danced around the orbit like a ritual now move out of step, like musicians playing from different scores. Here's what we've confirmed. The Earth's axial tilt remains unchanged. The orbital eccentricity, however, continues to rise. Now at 0.0189, still subtle, but significant enough to extend perihelion exposure for the northern latitudes by more than 11 days. The equinox still happens astronomically, but the response lag in the atmosphere and biosphere has become nonlinear. Feedback loops of oceanic heat, soil desiccation, and CO2 fluxes from burning peat and boreal forests are disrupting the planetary thermostat. In essence, the clock chimes, but the hands no longer move. The greatest casualty of this breakdown has been agriculture. Our entire food system was built on seasonal prediction. The planting and harvesting cycles, the pollination windows, the migration of insects, all synchronized to an ancient, reliable rhythm. That rhythm is gone. Crops that depend on night-length cues, like soybeans, grapes, and saffron, are no longer flowering properly. High-altitude crops like quinoa and coffee are failing to adapt to the unbroken daylight conditions. In some areas, plants began photosynthesizing continuously until they over-metabolized their sugars and self-destructed. And in the southern hemisphere, it's worse. Australia missed its spring entirely. The shift in solar angle meant early frost clung until October, then suddenly gave way to scorching temperatures within 3 days. Crops had no window to grow. Entire regions declared agricultural bankruptcy. The Andes, too, struggling with inverse patterns. Snowmelt failed. River levels in Peru and Bolivia are at their lowest in 200 years. Hydrological calendars are obsolete. I spoke to a climatologist in Argentina this week, Maria Benitez, brilliant woman, field biogeochemist. Her team's orchard simulation model had to be scrapped. The trees they were studying in Patagonia began blooming before the solstice, then collapsed under heat stress as their root systems remained in frozen ground. It was botanical schizophrenia. The UN's Emergency Food Forecasting Division has quietly admitted the seasonal calendar may never align again. So what replaces it? In desperation, localized food cooperatives are developing orbital shadow calendars, micro-regional planting guides based on satellite-based solar incidence modeling, not months or solstices. Farmers now reference the AOI, Angle of Incidence Index, updated weekly to decide what can grow, not where, not when, what can survive. Our ancestors used to look at the sky and know when to plant. We now have to ask satellites. I never thought I'd see the death of the equinox. But here it is, a mathematical fact. The day and night may balance somewhere, but Earth no longer hears the cue. The symmetry is broken, and we must now live in the asymmetry. End of entry. Tag, OSA entry 004. Sync with orbital prediction servers deferred. Signal integrity compromised. Update pending. Audio journal entry, December 16, 2030. Recorded by Dr. Adrian Voss, Senior Orbital Climate Analyst, ESA CERN, Joint Atmospheric Observatory. Dr. Adrian Voss, Journal Entry 5. Location, Subterranean Climate Core, Sector C, Planetary. It's the height of December. Normally by now, wind systems would be raging across the Atlantic, pressurizing the North Polar Jet. But today, at noon local time, there was no wind at all, not even at altitude. The sky is still, too still. Wind is motion. It's breath. It's the atmosphere doing its job, equalizing temperature across hemispheres, trading energy, maintaining the pulse of this living world. And now, it has stopped. Satellite LiDAR shows something we've never seen before. A static troposphere over key zones of the planet. The subtropical jet stream, which once curved like a graceful ribbon across the hemisphere, has unraveled. Over the equatorial Pacific, the trade winds have collapsed into a stagnant dome. The world has gone quiet, not just in noise, in function. Global atmospheric circulation is stalling. This morning, I stood outside the observatory's south-facing emergency hatch. We've kept it sealed for most of the year due to UV levels, but I needed air, and when I opened it, I felt none. Just absence. The trees beyond the ridge were completely motionless. No rustling, no bird song, just solar heat and silence. Across the world, reports are emerging of localized still zones, regions of air trapped between thermodynamic forces that no longer cycle. In Nigeria, people are collapsing not from heat stroke, but from oxygen saturation decline, air that is heavy, unrefreshed, filled with CO2 from decaying organic matter, just lingering over the land like a soft weight. What we're seeing is atmospheric paralysis. Let me explain. Wind is caused by differences in pressure. Pressure is caused by differences in heat. But with Earth's orbit elongating, the thermal contrasts between latitudes are breaking down in nonlinear ways. Heat is pooling and remaining. The high-pressure ridges over the oceans are no longer migrating. Cold air systems in the poles are shrinking, and polar vortexes have collapsed inward like deflated lungs. Without that push-pull, nothing moves. This has immediate, devastating consequences. Pollution accumulates. Major cities in Asia and South America now exist under domes of smog that don't disperse. Humidity festers, triggering mold blooms, building corrosion, and open-air bacterial outbreaks in tropical latitudes. Deserts expand inward, as evaporation occurs without wind to redistribute water vapor inland. It's as if the sky is holding its breath. We used to dread the storms of climate change. Now we dread the lack of them. Ironically, it's the coastal areas that are surviving, for now. Sea breezes, however faint, still allow for minimal convection, but the interiors of continents are becoming air tombs, zones of chemical stagnation where carbon and methane accumulate close to the ground. We've recorded surface-level methane readings in Saskatchewan and Kazakhstan, nearing danger thresholds, likely from shallow permafrost bursts. One of our station's atmospheric sensors, a 12-meter ultrasonic anemometer mounted on the ridge, hasn't moved in 4 days. Not a flicker. It's begun to feel symbolic, like the planet is watching us from behind a glass pane, distant, still, not asleep, just refusing to move. And I find myself asking a question I never imagined needing to consider. What happens to a world when the air stops? End of entry. Tag. OSA entry 005. Atmospheric kinetic models offline. Next update will require external drone validation. Prepare contingency protocols for low mobility zones. Audio journal entry. January 27, 2031. Recorded by Dr. Adrian Voss, Senior Orbital Climate Analyst, ESA-CERN Joint Atmospheric Observatory. Dr. Adrian Voss, Journal Entry 6. Location: Subterranean Quadrant 4A, Infrastructure Archive Deck, Planetary. It is now the second full orbit since confirmation of the elliptical drift. Atmospheric systems remain paralyzed. Solar intensity continues to rise. Global surface life is contracting inward. Humanity is digging. We used to build upward, towers, skylines, glass monuments to progress stretching into the clouds. Now, we burrow. I received this morning's international dispatch from the Trans-Geotech Assembly, a loose coalition of surviving engineering unions, deep earth mining firms, and sovereign bunker agencies. The new movement has a name: the Deep Build. It's not a project. It's not a plan. It's the only viable future left for habitable infrastructure. The surface of Earth is, for increasing regions, no longer livable. Not by temperature, nor pressure, nor chemical composition. What began as seasonal extremes has calcified into permanence. Solar radiation indexes remain elevated, even during aphelion. With the jet streams gone, and clouds no longer cycling moisture inland, the air is desiccated, irradiated, and chemically unstable. So we build down. There are three primary deep build typologies forming. 1. Subterranean cities, excavated beneath urban zones or mountains, such as those currently under Geneva, Addis Ababa, and portions of the Ural Arc. These zones are pressurized, UV sealed, and designed for full-year habitation. They feature mycelium-based insulation layers, bioluminescent lighting systems mimicking solar rhythm, vertical microfarms nourished via hydro-reclaimed condensation. One such city, Orpheum 3 in Norway, is already housing 14,000 residents beneath a retired rail tunnel system. Children there have never felt real wind. 2. Deep thermosteds, distributed underground outposts for food, research, and communication, designed for stability, not society. These are scattered in former glacial regions where permafrost is stable enough to support sealed excavation. I visited one last week near Chamonix. You enter through a narrow shaft cut into granite, then descend to a central spine where each room is oxygen balanced and scrubbed by algae walls. The silence down there feels like space. 3. Surface vaults and skins. For cities that cannot dig, they now enclose. High-density regions like Lagos, Mumbai, and Sao Paulo have initiated the urban skin projects, megadome architectures built from heat-dispersive composite layers. The domes use laminated solar membranes to generate power while shielding internal temperatures, but they require massive resources and trust. Entire populations must remain within sealed zones. One breach and the heat floods in. In Rio de Janeiro, a pilot vault failed. Over 800 died from thermal shock in under 2 hours. At the Planetary facility, we are retrofitting our own core. What was once a research hub now serves as emergency housing for displaced scientists and orbital engineers. Every hallway smells faintly of ozone and dust. We've converted 3 data vaults into sleeping quarters. The children draw skylines on the ceiling tiles. And yet, even these measures may not be enough. Because what we're facing is not a temporary crisis. The orbit isn't swinging back. The sun's trajectory relative to Earth has become a fixed distortion. Until we understand the outer system event that triggered this, the gravitational nudge, the cosmic pebble, we're working blind. Still, we adapt. New structures rise in reverse. They carve into the bedrock instead of piercing the sky. Civilization has shifted from towers of light to chambers of shadow. And in those depths, new societies are forming. Quiet, clever, communal. We are not defeated, but we are no longer surface creatures. End of entry. Tag. OSA entry 006. Begin scheduled sync with Deep Build Coordination Array. Status. Burrowing phase underway. Audio journal entry. March 8, 2031. Recorded by Dr. Adrian Voss, Senior Orbital Climate Analyst, ESA CERN, Joint Atmospheric Observatory. Dr. Adrian Voss, Journal Entry 7. It is March, but I had to check. Down here, we don't feel time pass. Not the way we used to. This entry will focus on non-climatic variables, specifically the psychological stress profile of long-term subterranean habitation and what I'm calling the pressure mind. It's been 72 days since I last saw the sky. I know that because I mark it on the inside of my cot panel. A small scratch each morning after artificial wake cycle chimes ring through the corridor. They say it's supposed to simulate birdsong. It doesn't. It sounds like a flute played underwater. We've adapted to live underground, but no one prepared us for how badly we're built for it. The climate outside, what little of it still stirs, is unlivable. Temperatures on the surface near the equator have remained above 50 degrees for 109 consecutive days. UV levels have sterilized large swaths of soil. But in here, in our temperature-regulated, humidity-controlled bunkers, the problem isn't the body, it's the mind. Something is changing in us. At first, it was subtle, forgetting dates, losing interest in scheduled activities, sensory drift, confusing smells, blending dreams into waking hours. Then came the collapse of emotional differentiation, joy, frustration, fear. They're all muted. Like someone's dampened the spectrum of internal weather. We now refer to it clinically as cognitive flattening syndrome, CFS. An emergent condition of long-term isolation from natural variation. Humans evolved in motion. We are creatures of friction and contrast, sun and shade, noise and silence, cold wind, warm breath. Here underground, everything is constant. Pressure controlled, light regulated, chemically scrubbed. No randomness, no scent of pine, no sudden gust across the cheek. You'd be surprised how badly we need the feeling of weather to remind us we exist. Sleep cycles are deteriorating across facilities. REM suppression is common. People no longer dream in movement. They dream in static rooms, corridors, metal. I've spoken with psychologists at Subcore Athens and Nairobi Deep One. Reports are the same. People grow quiet, not depressed per se, just compressed. We call it the pressure mind, and it's more than metaphor. Prolonged exposure to high-pressure sealed environments is subtly altering cortical behavior. Brainwave scans show increased delta wave intrusion during waking hours, normally seen only in deep sleep. It's as if part of our brains is choosing to shut off while the rest functions on autopilot. You can see it in the children. They play less. Their drawings have no horizon, just enclosed shapes. Rooms, tunnels, circles. I haven't seen a child draw a tree in weeks. I asked a 7-year-old why. He said, "Trees aren't real anymore." Some facilities are experimenting with synthetic weather chambers, rooms that simulate real wind, randomized lighting, even artificial rain. It's helped, marginally. But it's not the same. It's knowing it's fake that breaks the illusion. We remember what real wind feels like. These children don't. We are animals deprived of signal. And signal, sunlight, movement, wind, is identity. The earth hasn't just changed physically. It has blunted us. And so I ask, what becomes of humanity when the seasons are gone, and we are never touched by unprogrammed air again? Do we remain human? Or do we evolve into something narrower, tunnel-bound, efficient, emotionally flattened, adapted to survive without the sky? End of entry. Tag. OSA. Entry 007. Recommend dispatch of multisensory stimulus protocols to all Tier 3 sectors. Priority. Critical. Audio journal entry. May 2nd, 2031. Recorded by Dr. Adrian Voss, Senior Orbital Climate Analyst, ESA CERN Joint Atmospheric Observatory. Dr. Adrian Voss, journal entry. 8. Mid-orbit year marker. It would have once been the height of spring in the north, the slow turn of autumn in the south. But today, both hemispheres are locked in extremes. I am recording this entry to document the ecological consequences of seasonal collapse. What we once called spring and fall no longer function. The wild world has gone silent. The birds are gone. That's not poetic. That's observational fact. Multiple biosphere monitoring stations, including orbital biosonar relays and ground-based echo arrays, report an unprecedented drop in detectable avian frequencies. In most regions, bird calls have fallen below the ambient acoustic threshold. No migration, no mating displays, no flocking trails, just absence. We call this emerging phenomenon seasonal hollowing, a systemic breakdown in the biological cues that coordinate Earth's living cycles. And it's not just birds. Insect populations have fragmented, with many species either shifting to erratic emergent behaviors or collapsing entirely. Pollinators like bees and butterflies have lost their synchronization. Without the sun to guide consistent bloom patterns, nectar sources no longer align with their instinctive timelines. Some regions experience constant bloom, where plants, disoriented by solar persistence, flower indefinitely until they drain themselves of energy and die. Other regions, particularly in the shadow belts near the poles, have entered vegetative dormancy so deep it mimics death. Satellite imagery shows swaths of boreal forest in Russia and Canada that remain unchanged in color, density, or photosynthetic output for 7 months running. Trees, unable to decide whether to grow or shed, are now caught in a kind of botanical limbo. Even marine ecosystems, once thought buffered by the ocean's thermal inertia, are unraveling. Krill spawning off the Antarctic coast has collapsed by 90%, not because of temperature, but timing. The phytoplankton blooms they depend on have decoupled from solar angles, arriving weeks too early, or not at all. We've officially lost the Great Northern Flyway, the vast corridor of migratory birds that once stretched from Africa to the Arctic Circle. It used to be one of the most reliable indicators of planetary time. Now, there is no corridor, just isolated reports of lone birds flying in circles over cities, as if trying to remember something that no longer exists. Entire biospheres are failing because the signal is gone. For billions of years, Earth pulsed with rhythm, equinoxes, solstices, migrations, blooms, rests. This ancient drumbeat carried every species forward through deep time. Now the drum is broken, and the dancers don't know when to move. One of our field biologists, stationed at an elevated alpine observatory near the Pyrenees, sent a transmission yesterday, a voice file, shaky, quiet. She said, "I woke up to silence, no rustling, no hooves, no wings. I walked the ridge for hours, no tracks, nothing's passing through anymore. It's like the mountains have forgotten they were alive." We're seeing biotic collapse by disorientation, not just extinction. Species aren't being hunted or poisoned en masse. They are simply failing to function in a world without seasonal time. Organisms evolve to respond to cycles. Remove the cycle, and you unwrite the software. Attempts to simulate seasonality with artificial light arrays and acoustic signals have met with only minor success. A few pollinators can be coaxed into movement using frequency mimics. Some plants can be forced to bloom in subdomes, but wild ecosystems can't be industrialized. Nature cannot be domesticated to artificial time. And perhaps the most terrifying thought? This may be irreversible. Even if the orbit somehow stabilized, even if we reverse the heat and pressure in motionless skies, would the memory of seasons still remain? Would the forests remember spring? Would the birds relearn the way? Or have we passed a threshold where memory itself has collapsed? End of entry. Tag, OSA entry 008. Biosphere status, muted. Archive attached. Last flyway footage, Greenland sector, June 2030. Run simulation. Ecology without equinox. Audio journal entry, June 11th, 2031. Recorded by Dr. Adrian Voss, Senior Orbital Climate Analyst, ESA CERN, Joint Atmospheric Observatory. Dr. Adrian Voss, Entry 9. We've spent 16 months analyzing the drift, the curvature, the timing, the correlation vectors. This recording will focus on orbital mechanics, on how something so seemingly small, so astronomically subtle, could rewrite every living equation on this planet. It all comes back to the ellipse. Earth doesn't orbit the sun in a perfect circle. It never has. Our path has always been an ellipse, a slightly stretched loop, with perihelion, closest point to the sun, and aphelion, farthest point, marking the swing of seasons. It's elegant, predictable, stable, but only if the rest of the solar system cooperates. What we've now confirmed is that something shifted that balance, not catastrophically, not with a bang, but with a nudged whisper, the kind that ripples quietly for years before changing the entire rhythm. We've identified the origin of the perturbation. It began just beyond Saturn's orbit, a minor redistribution of mass within the Kuiper belt, likely caused by a localized density wave, possibly the trailing edge of a long-dead supernova's gravity echo, or a rogue mass grazing our system's edge 70,000 years ago. Think of it as a soft gravitational bruise. That mass displacement altered Jupiter's barycentric behavior by just enough to generate a slight orbital eccentricity shift. Over time, that imperceptible change reverberated outward, first subtly influencing Saturn and Mars, then Earth. Our planet began shifting deeper into its perihelion during its northern summer, a deviation of 0.00052 AU, about 7,800 kilometers. That's all. That's what changed everything. But that's just the start. This isn't a one-time anomaly. It's a feedback curve. Here's how. As Earth dips deeper into perihelion, we receive more solar energy at higher latitudes than ever before. That energy accelerates atmospheric disruption, weakening seasonal gradients, and redistributing heat. Weakened gradients destabilize oceanic currents, causing phase locking and thermal stagnation. Stagnant heat increases infrared re-radiation, which affects exospheric thermal expansion. The expanded exosphere subtly changes drag coefficients on LEO satellites, which feed orbital positioning data back into global systems with rising error rates. This is what we call the orbital calculus spiral. Orbital change causes climate change, which causes orbital drag effects, which further distort the very instruments we use to measure orbital change. Our mathematics is becoming recursive and dangerous. Worse, our models show that by 2035, Earth's orbital eccentricity could reach 0.0203, nearing Pleistocene-era thresholds. That's glacial and interglacial territory. But we're reaching it in decades, not millennia. In response, several planetary engineering proposals have emerged. Some border on madness, others on genius. Notable theories. Under review. Project Lagrange. A fleet of thin, kilometer-scale solar shields positioned at L1, between Earth and Sun, to block 0.6% of solar radiation. A global dimmer switch. The problem? Stability. Even the slightest drift of these shields could result in catastrophic light flicker across the planet, irradiating parts of the Earth in pulses. Project Yaw. Stabilizer. A concept from the Indian Space Institute, proposing we use Mars and the Moon as counterbalancing masses by creating a gravity resonance tether through controlled lunar orbit alteration. The energy cost? Equivalent to 50 years of all global electricity usage. The Terraform Array, a sprawling mirror field on the dark side of the Moon to reflect carefully timed heat pulses back to Earth's poles, attempting to re-establish a seasonal anchor through synchronized heating. I'm involved in a more modest program, Project Peria, which focuses on redirecting solar incidents using atmospheric seeding. We inject crystalline aerosols into the high stratosphere to scatter incoming solar radiation at perihelion. But we're running out of time. Our orbital path is shifting faster than we can model it. Even quantum satellites are struggling to track the minute gravitational variables at play. 1 week ago, a high-altitude probe captured a transit anomaly over the ecliptic plane. A gentle distortion in space-time, likely the echo of the original nudge that caused all this. Whatever passed near us is long gone, but its fingerprint remains, etched into our orbit, etched into our future. End of entry. Tag, OSA entry 009. Initiate orbital decay watch list updates. Begin modeling for 2033 perihelion spike. Audio journal entry, July 20th, 2031. Recorded by Dr. Adrian Voss, Senior Orbital Climate Analyst, ESA CERN, Joint Atmospheric Observatory. Dr. Adrian Voss, Entry 10. As of this morning, the Zurich Protocol has been ratified by 19 sovereign bodies. The resolution is clear. Atmospheric stability will now be recognized as a negotiable asset. In other words, climate is currency. We have entered an age where wind has value, not as metaphor, not as energy, as trade leverage. Let me explain. In the past 6 months, the number of climatically habitable zones, areas with breathable air, tolerable temperatures, and functioning weather, has shrunk by 27%. These stability zones are now more prized than oil ever was. Some are natural refugia, coastal highlands in Chile, deep forest pockets in eastern Madagascar, narrow river valleys in New Zealand. Others are manufactured. Orbital-cooled domes, bioshelters built atop ancient aquifers, cities floating on reflective polymer pontoons in the Arctic Circle. But all have one thing in common. They can support human metabolism without constant mechanical intervention. They allow breathing without masks, skin exposed to air, crops and soil. And because of this, they are now the gold standard of a collapsing economy. The new global metric is called the AQIR, or Resilient Atmospheric Quality Index. It calculates not just clean air, but temperature variance, localized wind motion, pollination, survivability. Per capita energy load, required for basic comfort. Zones with an AQIR over 71 are considered livable without system augmentation. There are fewer than 30 such regions left worldwide. And so, they've become barter states. Rather than trading goods or currencies, nations and coalitions now trade access to climate zones. For example, the Australian Commonwealth ceded 2 submarine fiber-optic corridors to the Pan-African Deep Belt Alliance in exchange for guaranteed resettlement rights in the Ethiopian highlands. Iceland granted solar data arrays to Japan's Orbital Weather Lab in exchange for genetic vault access and high-latitude crop seeds. The Canadian Fragmented Territories negotiated a 10-year exchange of boreal wind corridors with China's Deep Steppe Coalition in return for modular airship routes to floating solar cities. It's madness and genius, and it's all we have left, because infrastructure can't save everyone. There isn't enough power. There aren't enough engineers. There aren't enough aquifers. But wind, true wind, moving air, is now the one variable that no AI, no reactor, no biotech has been able to fully replicate. And so, it's priceless. Here at Planetary, we've been designated a Tier 2 neutral monitoring node. That means we provide certified AQIR data to all parties, but we can't influence negotiations. I watch them all. Climate diplomats hunched over neural maps, trading arc seconds of survivability like brokers on a market floor. A new economic class has emerged, climatocrats, political agents whose sole currency is access to breathable, temperate zones. They wear armored suits not to protect themselves, but to remind others that they've walked in wind. Children now play games pretending they've found the wind. In one, they trade seed pods from artificial gardens, each labeled with an imaginary zone: the Southern Breeze Ridge, the sky patch above Montreal, the cool corridor. It's bittersweet, beautiful, in its way. They're building mythologies out of weather. And why not? When the old economy collapses, stories become value. And wind, true wind, is now our myth. End of entry. Tag, OSA, entry 010. Upload AQIR trade matrix updates. Recommend designation of transitional atmospheric packs as protected climate class assets under orbital law. Audio journal entry, August 30th, 2031. Recorded by Dr. Adrian Voss, Senior Orbital Climate Analyst, ESA CERN, Joint Atmospheric Observatory. Dr. Adrian Voss, Journal Entry 11. The subject today is habitat design, not as theory, but as survival mandate. We used to build to express ourselves. Now we build to endure ourselves. This is the architecture of permanence in an impermanent world. Once, architecture was aspirational. We built glass towers to signal ambition, stadiums to reflect culture, homes to suggest identity. Buildings reached upward, symbolizing mastery over the earth. Today, that logic has reversed. Now we build with one intent only: to remain alive inside them. We call it shelter logic, a new philosophical and engineering framework guiding all climate age construction. No longer about beauty, sustainability, or style. Shelter logic asks only 3 questions. Can it survive? Can we live in it? Can we build it fast enough? Across the globe, human habitats are mutating into hardened shells, exoskeletons for civilization, shaped not by cities or cultures, but by thresholds: heat tolerance, oxygen retention, radiation deflection, and surface pressure compensation. The structures that now define our species share certain common traits. 1. Thermo-intelligent envelopes. No more concrete. No more steel beams. The materials of the deep build are dynamic. Composite skins layered with microcapillary fluids that change opacity, viscosity, and reflectivity in response to environmental strain. The latest living dome in Kenya's Laikipia Rift uses bioreactive paneling made from algae sand polymers. They thicken during daylight exposure, then exude a cooling mist at night. The walls breathe better than we do. 2. Negative pressure habitat cells. In atmospheric collapse zones, where surface air is no longer safe to inhale, cities have moved inward, not just underground, but inward within themselves. Compact, pressure-locked zones, no larger than airport terminals, are now home to thousands. These are modular, stackable, connectable, rotational, designed to seal and reseal endlessly as outer corridors decay. The irony: they resemble cells, biological ones, circular, self-sustaining, always repairing. Humanity has become its own tissue. 3. Acoustic and sensory rebalancing. The quiet is dangerous. One of the most overlooked features of shelter logic is the reintroduction of chaos. Artificial wind tunnels, randomized sound patterns, simulated birdsong embedded into the floors. Not for aesthetics, for mental calibration. Without irregularity, the mind dissolves. A recent report from Tokyo Subcore revealed a spike in hallucinations after 3 weeks without environmental randomness. Their solution? Echo chambers lined with programmable randomness engines. We are machines that require unpredictability to believe we're real. I've been consulting with design collectives in Chile, where they're constructing entire mountainside communes. The exteriors are raw stone, natural, untouched, but the interiors are woven with copper-threaded mycelium, growing walls that digest carbon and radiate thermal pulses at night. No right angles, no corridors, just spaces that flow like thought. This is the future of human space, not as fortress, but as mind extension. We're no longer living in architecture. We are merging with it. Shelter is not just about protection. It's becoming our interface with a world that no longer cares for us. The skin between us and the orbitally warped sky is our final point of negotiation. And what frightens me most? These new structures feel more permanent than the world itself. End of entry. Tag: OSA entry 011. Begin upload of shelter logic core parameters to the Global Habitat Archive. Attach notes. Design is survival. Audio journal entry. October 4th, 2032. Recorded by Dr. Adrian Voss, Senior Orbital Climate Analyst, ESA CERN Joint Atmospheric Observatory. Dr. Adrian Voss, Entry 12. It's been over a year since my last transmission. I regret the gap. Communications infrastructure remains degraded. This entry will document what is now being called the equatorial collapse event, a year in which the belt that once defined planetary stability vanished. The Earth, in effect, no longer has an equator. They're calling it the hollow belt now. The equator, the Earth's thermal spine, once the cradle of our atmospheric balance, has stopped functioning. Its signature traits: stable solar exposure, predictable rainfall, dense biodiversity, gone. What remains is a widening band of thermal silence, a band of Earth where nothing lives, nothing moves, and nothing falls from the sky. Let me be clear. This isn't simply a heat zone. It's a dead zone. How it began. Around March 2032, orbital solar sensors began detecting a flattening of cloud formation between 5 degrees and 5 degrees. At first, we assumed it was a seasonal delay in the Intertropical Convergence Zone, ITCZ. But by May, it became evident. The zone wasn't delayed, it had disintegrated. No more tropical updrafts, no more convection towers, no more rain. What remained was a hyperthermic pressure sheet, a nearly motionless dome of descending hot air that baked the equatorial surface with unbroken sunlight, day after day. Temperatures in Congo, Ecuador, and Borneo reached 68.2 degrees C in open sunlight. That's not survivable. Not for humans. Not for birds. Not for photosynthesis. Crops vaporized. Rivers dried into glassy canyons. Livestock began dropping in concentric heat rings around standing water. Trees died standing up. We received drone footage from western Indonesia. Entire forests gone gray, not from ash, but from chlorophyll collapse. But the true horror came later, when we saw the sky stop. Clouds ceased forming. The equator, a region once ruled by daily thunderheads and explosive rain bands, became a blank blue void. Orbital imagery now shows a distinct ring of cloudlessness slicing across the center of the planet. It looks surgical, artificial, but it isn't. It's orbital geometry, unbound. The eccentricity of Earth's path has now reached 0.0201. Perihelion strikes harder each year, and the solar angle over the equator has begun to dwell, hovering longer during each pass. What was once our planet's climatic metronome has become a magnifying lens. And here's the paradox. The equator, once the most biologically rich and climatically stable region, is now the most unstable and biologically inert. Populations have fled, millions displaced. Entire equatorial nations now exist only in exile, scattered across microdome cities in temperate latitudes. Ecuador is now based in southern Patagonia. Gabon's government operates from a Norwegian substation in Tromsø. The equator has become a memory, a geopolitical ghost. Culturally, this has been devastating. So much of our mythology, our ancient cities, our ancestral movements were equator-bound. The birthplace of timekeeping, solar zeniths, shadowless days, the calendars of the Maya, the builders of Nabta Playa, all centered on equatorial logic. Balanced solar power, constant day length. It defined us. And now, the equator is just a number on a globe, no longer a place, no longer a pattern. Some researchers at the Global Heritage Nexus are calling this the latitude collapse, a term for the moment when latitudinal distinction ceases to correlate with environmental reality, where being north or south means nothing to the weather. That's where we are now. The Earth no longer turns in climate symmetry. It twists, asymmetrical, offbeat, like a vinyl record warped by fire. And yet, in the silence of the equator, something eerie remains. Stillness. Vastness. A kind of planetary pause. Some say we should build there again, beneath, shielded, hidden, use the blankness as shelter from the chaos elsewhere. But others, myself included, believe it should be left alone. As warning, as scar, as proof of what happens when balance is lost. End of entry. Tag, OSA, entry 012. Coordinate with displaced equatorial research clusters. Begin recording orbital asymmetry markers for long-range prediction logs. Designation: no axis to return to. Audio journal entry, December 18th, 2032. Recorded by Dr. Adrian Voss, Senior Orbital Climate Analyst, ESA CERN, Joint Atmospheric Observatory. Dr. Adrian Voss, Entry 13. This log is being recorded during active emergency conditions. Planetary atmospheric core has entered partial lockdown. External sensor temperatures have breached structural thresholds. We have 47 hours of unassisted stability left unless auxiliary cooling is restored. I am recording from Isolation Deck Delta 2. If this is my final transmission, let it be testimony. Shelter is not salvation, not forever. It began with a sound, a groan, not mechanical, not metallic, but geological. A deep, spine-crawling shift in the rock around us, like the earth inhaling through its teeth. Then the systems began to fail. The Planetary facility, once the flagship of ESA's subterranean resilience design, is nearing collapse. Designed to withstand 90°C surface exposure, Category 4 solar flares, and seismic oscillations from lunar tug cycles, it was supposed to be indestructible. But the planet is outpacing design. What caused it? 3 days ago, a thermal inversion flare swept through Central Europe, an event triggered by concentrated solar buildup over the Mediterranean basin. The air mass flipped. A hot layer settled beneath a cooler one, pressurizing the lower atmosphere like a piston. The flare created a compression wave, a kind of horizontal heatquake. It slammed into the Jura Mountains with enough force to cause micro-faulting beneath our facility. Not an earthquake exactly, more like a thermal bruise. The result? Sensor arrays ruptured. Air recirculation pumps seized. One section of the outer corridor now reads 64.7 degrees indoors. And worst of all, our coolant reserves are venting into the bedrock. We've gone from climate researchers to climate refugees, inside our own bunker. Right now, most of the population is in Core C, 612 individuals sealed behind thick lock blast doors, waiting for the temperature curve to plateau. But we're not sure it will. The orbit has tilted us into another perihelion spiral, one no model predicted. My job now? To document, to witness, and to buy time. I've rerouted the last of our internal network power to boost the cooling loop in Core B. If the system holds, that buys them 5 more days. If it doesn't, the collapse will begin in sequence, heat zones pressing inward like a slow tide. We used to think bunkers would save us, that we could hide from orbit, wall ourselves off from the sun's geometry. But geometry doesn't care about walls. Geometry wins. A strange thing happens in moments like this. You begin to see the bones of your existence, the outlines of every choice that brought us here. We built machines to study the sky. Then we built shelters to hide from what we learned. And now we sit between those two choices, wondering which one will kill us first. Even here, in the most advanced subterranean complex on Earth, we've reached the breakpoint, the line where structure, biology, and psychology converge into a single truth. Nothing is permanent. Not the air, not the rhythm of the sun, not the idea of safe. And yet, even now, I feel no panic, only clarity, the kind you find at the edge of systems. If this place falls, someone will find this archive, maybe in a decade, maybe in a century. Let them hear us. Let them know we tried. End of entry. Tag. OSA. Entry 013. Engage passive archive redundancy. Seal core delta. This station is not lost yet. Audio journal entry. March 6th, 2033. Recorded by Dr. Adrian Voss, Senior Orbital Climate Analyst, ESA CERN, Joint Atmospheric Observatory, Reactivated Subcore Node Alpha. Dr. Adrian Voss, Entry 14. Transmission reestablished. Location: temporary operations station below Planetary glacial shelf. The fire is over. The planet has swung outward. This log marks the beginning of what we are calling the aphelion lock. It has begun to snow, and no one is celebrating. It's difficult to describe the quiet. It doesn't feel peaceful. It feels paused, like Earth itself is holding its breath. 2 weeks ago, solar observatories in lunar orbit confirmed the readings. Earth's orbital eccentricity, after increasing year over year, has peaked at 0.0207. The farthest point in our orbit, aphelion, has stretched farther than it has in any known phase of human civilization. For comparison, our distance from the Sun has increased by just over 3.1 million kilometers compared to the Holocene average. A rounding error in cosmic terms. A catastrophe in biological ones. We've entered the long freeze. At first it was subtle. Winds began to return, not as force, but as whisper. Then temperatures began falling, not suddenly but steeply, in curves no model predicted. The sun seemed dimmer, its angle shallower, its heat diffused. Then one morning we opened a blast door in Isolation Sector 5 to check external sensor stations, and we saw it. Snow. Actual snow. Not ash. Not evaporated frost. Real crystalline ice falling in silence across the burnt Alps, and behind it, sky. Pale. Dusty. Blue. But still. The orbit has swung outward, and the Earth has gone cold. But this is not a return to balance. It is overcorrection, a pendulum arcing too far in the opposite direction. What's happening? Solar insolation has dropped by an average of 4.2% across the northern hemisphere. Oceanic surface temperatures in the North Atlantic have fallen by 3 degrees in just 45 days. Glacial sheets in Greenland and western Siberia are no longer melting. They are advancing. Atmospheric moisture, once thick and stagnant, is freezing mid-descent, creating dry snow that carries no meltwater value. It looks pure, but it is functionally sterile. We call it the aphelion lock, a new orbital condition where Earth dwells longer in the cold arc of its ellipse. The curvature has tightened. The orbit is warped, asymmetric. We reach aphelion and linger there, like a planet unsure if it wants to come back. What this means is devastating. Regions once scorched are now flash frozen. The Saharan shelf dropped to 6 degrees C last week. Bangladesh's inland waterways froze solid. Even the equatorial highlands of Kenya, our last known open-air biosphere, have reported night freezes hard enough to kill the last of their free-growing crops. And inside the bunkers? We're not built for this. Our shelters were designed for heat tolerance, UV shielding, passive cooling, thermal rejection. But now we scramble to generate warmth, to heat what we once tried desperately to cool. People are collapsing from hypothermic dropouts inside uninsulated core zones. Water reserves are freezing in pipes. Bioluminescent mycelium systems are going dormant. The algae walls have turned brown. And in all this cold, the noise is gone. No drone traffic, no distant thunder, no structural groans, just the hiss of thermal jackets and the sound of boots on ice. The silence is unbearable. I walked the upper corridor today alone, past broken terminals and half-lit biometric panels. I placed my hand on the observation lens and watched snow fall across the ruins of our outer ventilation towers. It looked beautiful, pure. But I knew what it meant. This is not winter. This is orbital exile. We're not rotating through a season. We are being flung, gravitationally, into the solar system's outer silence. A breath held too long, a light too far. Some wonder if this is the beginning of a new ice age. But it's worse than that. An ice age implies rhythm, predictability. This is chaos made quiet. We're not in a cycle. We're in a tailspin. End of entry. Tag. OSA entry 014. Begin cryogenic contingency modeling. Prepare biome domes for deep hibernation mode. Archive under designation. The first silence. Audio journal entry. September 1st, 2034. Recorded by Dr. Adrian Voss, Senior Orbital Climate Analyst, ESA CERN Joint Atmospheric Observatory, Planetary Sector Resilience Node. Dr. Adrian Voss. Entry 15. 4 years since the shift began. 11 months since the lock froze us. I'm recording this from Core Observation Deck Theta 1. Something has changed in the sky. This morning, I heard wind. Not simulated airflow, not ventilation cycling. Wind. It was faint, almost imperceptible. A low murmur threading its way through a breech vent above the old data hall. I stood still, holding my breath, thinking it was some auditory hallucination. But then dust moved, an actual spiral of it, dancing in the pale morning light filtering through the cracked pane. The Earth is exhaling again. The orbital data confirms it. Sometime in the last 60 days, a subtle shift occurred, an asymmetry in the Sun's tidal coupling to Earth's orbit, which appears to have nudged us slightly back toward center. It's not a full recovery. The aphelion remains distant, the orbit still stretched, but the path has bent, just slightly, enough to trigger a cascade of micro-seasonal behaviors. What we are witnessing is the first systemic reactivation of climate behavior since the initial shift. The jet stream has resumed shallow undulations over the North Atlantic. Ice melt patterns now align, barely, with solar angles. Upper atmosphere moisture is condensing, not as storms, but as clouds. The sky has texture again. Across our observation network, subtle signs abound. In Patagonia, autonomous weather balloons report consistent air movement for 12 consecutive days. In the Central Asian steppe, permafrost layers are holding, not advancing, not retreating, holding. In Finland, children emerged from the shelter dome to feel wind on their faces for the first time in 3 years. A teacher wrote, "They didn't know what it was at first. They laughed. One of them cried." And here at Planetary, we opened the West Access Tunnel, not for evacuation, not for supply, just to listen. It's still cold, inhumanly so, but the frost no longer spreads. Surfaces melt fractionally during midday. Algae cultures on our interior walls are greening again. And down in Core Epsilon, the hydroponic rows have bloomed, not from artificial cycles, but from a real sense that the Earth is turning once more. We believe a new orbital harmonic has emerged, a kind of non-linear rhythm, not the predictable cycles of the past, but a new form of stability within motion. Not equilibrium, but something deeper, dynamic tension. A tug of war the planet has learned to survive by adjusting its breath. And we've adjusted too. We no longer think of years as units. We measure time by curves, how far from the sun, how close. What that means for breathability, for migration, for seed deployment. Time now means, how long until it gets better? How long until it gets worse? But today, the Earth took a breath. We've emerged from the orbital spiral not whole, but awake. Not restored, but alive. This log will close the first archive of the Planetary Climate Chronicle. Future entries, if they continue, will belong to another rhythm, one defined not by what we lost, but by what continues. End of entry. Tag, OSA entry 015. Archive full series. Label final chapter. The breath returns. Timestamp atmospheric stir point as planetary reactivation marker. Entry sealed.